So I want to start today just by thanking everybody here. I think nearly everybody in this room probably at some point over the last couple of years I've spoken to about developing these reforms to support accommodation. And we've obviously worked with hundreds of people across the children's social care sector, providers, local authorities, charities, to get to where we are now. And I think where we are now is, with all of your help, we've laid what I think is really important groundwork for truly significant change for how children's social care in this country accommodates 16 and 17-year-old looked after children and care leavers. And I think a really important part of getting that right was, over the last couple of years, we're really proud of the extent to which we've worked with care experienced children and young people on these reforms. Whether it be through the 3 public consultations we've done, probably hundreds of engagement events as well with care experienced children and young people. And we've also run series of focus groups. And I think, all of that work's given us obviously really invaluable insight into what young people think is important for supported accommodation, what their needs are, what they expect. And I think we can probably all agree that, listening to children and young people is really, really paramount. Otherwise, how can we possibly get anything right in terms of meeting their needs? And I'm very glad that, I can confidently stand on this platform today and say that I think that we have got this right, that children and young people are supportive of the national standards and the way that we're regulating the provision. So just to say a little bit about, why are we reforming supported accommodation in the first place? I think, primarily this is driven by children's needs. So over the last 10 years or so, the makeup of children in the care system has changed really significantly. We now have considerably more older children aged 16 and 17 in care than we had 10, 15 years ago. And inevitably, that is going to change the type of accommodation and support that we need to deliver for children and young people. We've now got almost, it's over 7,000 16 and 17-year-old looked after children living in semi-independent provision. And we really need to make sure that, placements meet that change in demand. Over the last couple of years, I've heard so many times from children and young people that they just don't want to live in a children's home when they get to 16, 17 years old, perhaps when they're coming into care for the first time. And the children's social care system has got to make sure it's got an option for those children to live semi-independently. Because we know that, really good quality supported accommodation with positive support from well-equipped staff who genuinely care about the children can provide the right foundation for lots of these children and young people, as they're on that journey to becoming successful adults. And I think, we're obviously introducing reforms to support accommodation, but I do want to acknowledge that we know there are lots of really, really good providers out there, really good providers who are meeting the needs of some of those older young people. And that's often been against quite a difficult backdrop of often media criticism and criticism from the sector about this provision generally. The term unregulated provision, which carries lots of negative connotations, I think, for some pretty good providers. And as we roll out these reforms, we need to make sure that, we maintain the very best of that provision. We don't see those really good providers leave the market. We just expand and see more of them in future. But I also do want to acknowledge, one of the primary drivers of this reform program is the fact that, and I've seen this with my own eyes, and some of you will have seen cases in the media, there are cases where this provision's just not been good enough, where children and young people have been placed in settings that don't meet their needs, sometimes put them at risk, and they've significantly fallen short. And I think we shouldn't accept that. And as we introduce these reforms, we shouldn't accept that in future. And that's why we think that now is the right time to introduce these national quality standards that all providers have to follow to make sure that accommodation and support for these older young people is, good quality, it's consistently good quality, and also give effective levers to Ofsted so that they can take action where, provision, the quality of provision isn't as good as we expect for the children that we look after. And we know that, supported accommodation is, children in these provision are best served by this provision where it is regulated, where there are really clear expectations on standards of provision. That poor practice in the sector is worked on and sometimes eliminated, and standards are consistently high. And we're determined, as we roll out these reforms to supported accommodation, to make sure that all of this provision across the country is doing the very best for these vulnerable children. I think most of you will know that in 2021, we banned the placement of children under the age of 16 and what is unregulated provision, but we often term semi-independent living, because we simply don't think that provision that's intended to provide semi-independent living arrangements for older children is appropriate for children as young as 14 and 15, and that all of those young people should be in children's home and foster care placements. And that's why we took the action that we did. And I think we should all be proud of the fact that in future, once we roll out these reforms from October, where all providers have to be registered, that there will be no form of unregulated provision in children's social care. And I think that'll be a really important moment for kind of reform to children's social care across the country. And, we do want to acknowledge also that whilst these reforms are obviously necessary for the reasons I've set out, they do represent really significant change for not just local authorities, but obviously providers, all of you here in this room today. And we recognise that the shift to, meeting new quality standards, getting ready for Ofsted registration, getting ready for being inspected by Ofsted is going to require quite a lot of time and effort. And I'm clear that, as the policy lead, as we've developed this programme over the last couple of years, that the intention's never been to, overburden the market of providers with bureaucratic requirements. It's simply about raising the bar for the quality of this provision, making sure we do that in a proportionate way where we don't see providers leave the market in large numbers, but we raise the quality of provision so that all children are safe, supported, and the provision meets their needs. And, in that vein, that's why we've purposely planned what we'd refer to as a phased transition as we introduce the new arrangements, where we've given everybody 6 months until October, for example, to submit their registration application to Ofsted. And even beyond October, once that application's been submitted, providers can legally continue to operate until it's been determined. So we expect that will really help us kind of manage the implementation of the reforms, but we will obviously kind of monitor that through the work of the National Children's Bureau to make sure that providers are ready for this, that we don't see, for example, a big cliff edge in provision from October and we don't have enough placements for looked after children. And really, we are committed to working with the sector over the next year or so, and probably beyond, to make sure that these changes embed properly during that transitional period. And that's one of the reasons we're working with the National Children's Bureau. They're going to provide some really good practical support, information, guidance on good practice, bringing people together like they have today in this room. And we're really looking forward to sort of developing that partnership, over the next 14 months or so. And I would encourage as many of you in this room as possible to engage with that support that the National Children's Bureau are going to be offering. It's free. It's an offer of support to get you ready for whether it be adhering to new national standards or preparing for registration so that everybody knows what's expected of them, but also bringing people together so you can share ideas and learning. And I'm sure Caroline will explain a little bit more on that shortly. And another thing I just want to talk about a little bit is that we know that whilst this is going to be, a new burden to some extent for providers as they get ready for the new reforms, we know that there are going to be additional pressures for local authorities as well, which is why we are going to be investing over £123 million over the next 2 years to support local authorities to absorb those new costs associated with, provider market. The provider market we expect will, face new operational costs as a result of this and probably pass those costs on to local authorities in the form of placement fees. And the first grant payments for that investment will go out on Friday. So these reforms to support accommodation, I guess, are just, we would say, one step towards achieving our wider ambitions for children's social care. And it's important to point out, I think, that the success of these reforms is only really possible if we're able to deliver the more systemic and the more fundamental changes to the care landscape that we set out on the 2nd of February, as many of you will know, in the government's response to the Independent Children's Social Care Review, Stable Homes Built on Love, which is the implementation strategy for delivering those ambitions over the coming years. And it's a long-term strategy to reform children's social care, of which these reforms to support accommodation are going to be a major part. We heard from the Minister this morning that, I guess at its core, that strategy is really about focusing on what matters for children: family, love, and a safe, stable, and reliable place to call home, all of which is, what these supported accommodation reforms are aimed at kind of improving for children and young people. And these are the things that ultimately make a difference for children. You guys are the experts. You all know that. You don't need me to tell you that. But I guess the implementation strategy will really kind of focus government's reform program on those really core aims. And just to set out that the strategy, I guess, is built on 6 key pillars, all of which I think we need to think about today as we consider supported accommodation, but children's social care more broadly as well. The first one, providing the right support at the right time so that children can thrive with their families. Number 2, strengthening our child protection response. So that's getting agencies working together in a more integrated way than they do now, and being led by social workers with specialist expertise. We know they're the real experts in children's social care. The third, we need to unlock the potential of kinship care. So wherever possible, that will mean children staying with their parents or being cared for by people who know and love them already. And number 4, I guess, being ambitious for children and care leavers, which I think we're all doing today in this room through kind of focusing on these reforms. But that'll mean providing them with the right support to help them thrive and really achieve their potential. 5 would be provide a valuable, supported and highly skilled social worker for every child who needs one, which I think is, a really ambitious part of this implementation strategy. And finally, making sure the whole system continuously learns and improves. And I think in practice, that will mean effectively making better use of evidence and data. And I think through this reform program, we've kind of modeled a really good new way of doing that. Really extensive planned consultation with not just providers and local authorities, but children and young people, as I've talked about. And, inevitably, the supported accommodation sector, all of you guys here in this room today, are going to be, a major player in delivering that implementation strategy. We want you to be in the room, be part of the conversations, and really contribute to what this looks like in future. And finally, I just want to finish by thanking everyone who's helped us make these reforms possible. The policy team at DFE can't just do this on our own. It's all about collecting the expertise, the information, the intelligence from people like you, so that we know what really works for the sector and what really works for children and young people. And I guess linked to that, I want to thank the National Children's Bureau as well, who brought us all here today. There will be a lot more of this type of thing over the coming years, I expect. So really looking forward to working with you all on that. And I'd finish, I think, by just urging us all to prioritize our efforts on, when we're thinking about introducing these new reforms and implementing them in your providers and with local authorities, really focusing on how is this making lives better for children and young people, because that should be the really key focus here. Making sure that they're safe, making sure they're supported, that they feel heard. I would ask that you have a resolute focus on that today and in future. Because I think, ultimately that's why we're all here doing the jobs that we do, right? Thank you.